Welcome to the creative brain of Dean Hawk. Get ready to be challenged, inspired, and equipped to become a better ministry leader.
Hey, welcome to this month's podcast. I hope you guys are having a great fall. This month, we are talking about why do you need an attorney on speed dial. And today I have a special guest with me. Her name is Ashley Hawk. Now, she's not my sister, but and we actually aren't related, but yet we are, because she is the wife of our new executive pastor that joined us this past summer. And so it's been a joy to have Ashley joining us on our team. But Ashley is an attorney, and she runs Hawk Legal and Consulting, where she specializes in working with, guess what, churches, 501c3s, and helping them with their legal issues and risk management. So welcome, Ashley, to the podcast. And give us a little background about your legal history, and you chose to get involved in church law.
That's right, yes. So I've been an attorney for about 12 years, but I've done kinds of odds and ends for a while my kids were young. However, through just some circumstances, I found myself on staff at a church as their senior legal director, and through that process, I even realized how much churches could benefit from having an attorney on their team, maybe not their staff, but on speed dial, like Pastor Dean alluded to. And so when we left that church, I decided I could do this on my own for churches. And so I kind of posed to church that I'm more of a legal consultant for them. Anything that comes across their desk that they're not sure what to do about, they can give me a call. I think it works really well. My husband's been in ministry over 20 years, and so I have kind of the ministry background and the legal background, and so I can kind of speak into that lane of helping churches with what they need.
Okay, that's really cool. So I was just telling Ashley before we began the podcast, our church was just a year and a half old. And we ran into a difficult situation, and we said, we need an attorney. And part of our problem is we didn't have an attorney. It's like, who specializes in this? Who can help us navigate this as a church? And since that was a learning point for me, who are you going to call in the moment of a crisis situation? Right. Whether that is a situation, a people situation, a contract legal situation, a lawsuit, somebody, I don't know have you had many churches of people suing the church and needing legal representation?
Yes, so we have dealt with that. I don't represent necessarily, but I will facilitate that with a litigator, a litigation attorney. So it can be really helpful to have someone who speaks what we call in the legal world legalese, the jargon, right?
Yes.
To be able to read a contract and tell you exactly what you're getting into, or highlight those main points for you. I've helped churches negotiate leases, so different real estate deals. I think churches would be surprised of what they could use an attorney for, or they could consult with an attorney for. I think we think these high level, I've gotten sued situations, but there's really a lot of other issues that churches could be helped by speaking.
Well, and we all know what Scripture teaches us, that in the multitude of counselors, there's safety. Mm-hmm. And so I view the legal voice for me as a leader, the legal voice for us as a church, is a point of safety in us making good decisions, big and small. So I want to ask you, what kinds of issues have you dealt with in your church legal arena? What are some of the situations that you have, issues that you've helped churches through?
So when I was on staff at that church, I actually learned myself how much there is, to explore in the legal world of churches. But I would say I act as kind of a general counsel for churches. And so if you have, like I mentioned, real estate, if you have a lease, renewal coming up, you want to renegotiate it, something like that. You have a contract that you don't really understand all the pieces of. You want to make sure you're understanding it right. You want to look through your bylaws and amend your
Yes.
bylaws and see if those are, stating what you think they state. Also, I've helped churches start other nonprofits, so incorporating
Right.
nonprofits. I've handled some insurance matters and consulted on risk management issues.
Oh,
And
that's
so
good.
where are your risks in the church? And that on that side of things.
What should we as leaders, what should we as leaders of churches, what should we be asking as we look at our ministries, our organizations? What should we be asking to determine where we might be at risk legally?
I think with churches, just like with anything else, you don't know what you don't know a lot of times. And having been in ministry and in ministry now, I want the ministry to be done by the pastors, right? We want
Sure.
to take pastors out of the legal, world and let professionals handle that. So I think what I would say, consider maybe doing what I call like a legal audit. You could just
Talk that out. What does that mean?
Okay, so I have a kind of thing I put together, but other attorneys do this too, and you can probably even find one online. But what it is, it's just like a list of questions
Okay.
hitting on different areas. So like HR,
Sure.
your bylaws, your incorporation documents, those types of things, risk management, your security with your IT and data and stuff like that. So different categories that ask you questions, and that will help you see, oh, we've done this. Great.
Okay.
Or it will show you maybe where your gaps are. And so I'm going through this with the church right now, and my role is just to kind of look over that assessment, give them my thoughts of where they're at risk or where
Okay.
their gaps are.
They could shore it up a little bit.
And then it's up to that church whether they want to do that. Sometimes, you may decide, well, we know that that's a gap, but we don't have the funds, or we don't feel like we need to,
Okay. And they're rolling the dice in those areas. That
right.
They...
And sometimes it might be, I can be pretty conservative when it comes to that, just because that's what I do. And I think about the big what ifs and,
Sure.
things, but
You're thinking 5 layers, and
Yes.
most of us are thinking 1 or 2.
right. Yes. And so but I think it's important, if you know, then you can make an informed decision on whether to fill that gap or to go, okay, we are aware that it exists.
Right. Now, I know you just recently mentioned you're helping a church navigate the preschool. What is it? What are they starting? Preschool.
Oh, yes. So they're starting a child care center.
Child care
Mhm.
center.
Mhm.
Okay. I know a lot of pastors either have them,
Mhm.
want to start them, and we have not crossed that road. But you were mentioning the other day that is quite a lengthy process to get up to par, all of the paperwork.
Mhm.
Talk to us about a church who's looking at potentially starting that,
Sure.
and what to expect and where you can potentially help.
So that's a perfect example of maybe when to consult, a legal consultant or have someone speak into that, because you can go different ways. Some churches have it where they just offer it for their staff, and that's probably okay. Everything's, you're keeping it internal. But when you start to think, oh, we might want to take this into the community,
Yes.
we might want to offer this. I think that's where could be helpful for you to talk to somebody, one, and what's the best way to set it up, because you can set it up as a nonprofit, you can set it up as an LLC, there's a myriad of ways you can set it up legally, but also what are our risks in doing that, what things, because churches are very protected in some areas,
Okay.
right, as far as like being able to discriminate based on religion,
Okay.
based on other things. So when you kind of go on these off-roads to other avenues like a childcare center, you want to make sure you're still in line with the regulations and laws, and and you could be covered if you're under a nonprofit umbrella. You could still operate just as you operate your church, but it's not a guaranteed, and so
Okay.
it's something you want to just check those boxes.
Now, this is a total curiosity question
Okay.
on the whole childcare thing, because I know so many churches do it. Is it best to have the child care under its own organization as a layer of protection from the church? Or, as you mentioned, churches have a little more leniency. If I said to you, in 2025, I want to start a child care center, would you lean 51% one way or another of putting it under the church or actually starting another
Right.
organization?
I think I would ask follow-up questions. I think
Okay, that's
it
fair.
definitely depends on what you see the future of it, what you're trying to accomplish. Is it more important to you that you have the religious protections?
Okay.
Or is it more important to you that maybe it be profitable? Or,
Yes.
or is it more important to you that you do limit the liability of the church? In that case, I would definitely say you need to make it its own LLC. It can
Okay.
still live under
Okay.
that church umbrella,
Okay.
but you are kind of arm's length away from it as far as
Okay.
liability. So if something were to happen in your child care center, the church would not be affected as far as
Okay.
liability.
What about I have a church and I'm wanting to launch a new ministry, a new organization, developing their own bylaws, coming under the umbrella, the nonprofit thing. Talk to us about some of those. Any hints or tips in that arena? Because I know a lot of churches, maybe they're starting a dream center in their
Sure.
community, and which is outreach and is good. Is that separate? Is that the same? Share any insights there.
I think for me, I really caution churches from just starting a bunch of 501c3s.
Okay.
They are very useful and they're very helpful, but I think if you're getting started, even with the child care center thing, if you're keeping it internal, there's no harm in keeping it within your church.
Same umbrella.
To start.
Okay.
I think when it becomes necessary for it to become its own thing is like, when it's been going a while, when it's bringing in its money, when you start to see where it's, mixing it with the church is not probably the best. So I think it just depends on what
Okay.
your goal with it is, what you see. What I have seen some churches do is spin off all these nonprofits, and then it becomes a little difficult to manage, or you are managing it, but you're maybe not 100% compliant with keeping
Yep.
separate books or keeping separate bylaws or those types of things. So I'm a big proponent of, if you do it right. And
Okay.
so I don't think
Okay.
there's any harm in feeling it out for that
Okay.
first year if it's going to start small. Now, there are definitely times you want to go ahead and start that, but again, I think it just depends.
Sounds good. All right, here's a loaded question.
Okay.
What are some of the most common mistakes you see pastors and church leaders making over the last 12 years being in this arena?
Good question.
What would you advise us as church leaders? Where do you feel like some arenas? Are there pockets that we tend to fall prey to?
I think overall, churches can underestimate the importance of doing some of these things correctly. And I
Good.
speak that as a former church planner. Sometimes we get, let's just take your incorporating documents for one, your articles, your bylaws. Sometimes we just get a standard template of that. We're like, great,
Right.
check it off. We've got it. And those are good. There's nothing wrong with that. I think where the breakdown comes is we don't understand what they say. So
Right.
they're legally compliant. There's a lot of organizations that help churches get started in doing that are great. But again, I think as pastors, as church leaders, it's important to know what they actually say and to actually abide by them. Dealing with the church right now where the bylaws are actually coming in to play. Like
Okay.
courts are, if you get, pray nobody gets into these situations, but if you get into a situation where the courts have to decide whether they're getting involved, bylaws become super important.
Sure.
Because courts will allow churches to govern themselves if they are actually governing themselves.
Okay.
If they look at a church how you're operating and look at your bylaws, and you're not operating at all by your bylaws, or you've kind of created your own policies that aren't in line with nonprofit law, courts will step in. And
Okay.
so I
Okay.
think that's something.
So potentially it could be wise for a church. I'm going to guess many pastors, you've not reviewed your bylaws in probably 10 to 30 years. It might be worth taking a look at those, having to revamp. I'm going to give my opinion of one of the biggest mistakes I've seen leaders make, and we saw it exposed this summer of 2024, is when in doubt, not seeking legal counsel. And I just see all too often that, I'm going to be blunt, you can call me for an opinion of a situation you're facing, but if it's of any magnitude, you need somebody that can give you some really legal insight. And I just look back at the whole situation we had this past summer. We all saw the national news of Robert Morris and 35, 40 years ago, the situation with a 12-year-old girl. And what I was screaming and frustrated is, I'm like, why didn't the leadership seek legal counsel? Can we just have a pastor go through rehabilitation? What do we need to do? Yeah. And that's, when in doubt, please ask, and make that consultation call to someone that you have in your community, someone that's within your church, reaching out to Ashley, whatever that is. Please do not let a couple $100 stop you from making a really good decision or a potentially bad one. I want to shift gears just a little bit. Forever we hear this church and state. Yeah. What can we do? What can we do? Give us, from a legal perspective, some background of what is meant by that whole context, and it's not even in our laws and in our foundation of our government, but it's played often by both sides.
Sure. So, most of you probably know this whole idea of church and state is a doctrine that goes back to the beginnings of the country, right? And this idea that government cannot interfere with church, and it's written in our First Amendment. The government cannot establish a religion, nor can they police religion, and so we see it. This big idea kind of carried out in other regulations and laws. As you know, churches are tax exempt. That kind of is that whole church and state thing.
Sure.
Also, I just alluded to the courts. The courts will not get involved in a church matter if they don't need to, and that is called the ecclesiastical abstention doctrine.
Okay.
In courts, which saying the courts will not step into a church that is effectively governing themselves.
Okay.
And so you also know it as far as like churches are exempt from certain of the Civil Rights Act. So the church can discriminate based on religion, meaning if you have someone applying for a ministerial position that isn't not within your religion, you can say no. And so that can't happen in the corporate world. And so we see that kind of idea in all these different, kind of pieces. And so that's,
Yeah. Okay, good. What are some best practices when it comes to employees following the laws that are in place and what you can and cannot do? And I heard a situation, this was 10 plus years ago, and I don't even know if it's legal. If I was the employee, I would be asking. The pastor came in and said, "Hey, we're in a building program. We have no money. Everyone's on furlough, which means you're not getting paid, but I'm expecting you to continue to do your job for the next 90 days. Well, these people are starving. What are mistakes you've seen churches do? Is that situation I even mentioned, is that legal?
Don't do that. That's not legal. You are violating a lot of employment laws when you do that.
Okay.
So this kind of is where kind of HR and legal kind of overlap. I would say, make sure you have an HR representative that is up to speed on things. There's an organization called SHRM, SHRM, phenomenal with HR. I think the membership is it's not a huge amount.
And what would they do? Let me interrupt. What would they do?
So they have a lot of resources.
Okay.
They have some, you can do some programs on there, get some different credentials and stuff for HR.
Okay.
When I have an HR question, that's where I go. They're very up to speed on all that. And so there is a lot of crossover. I would say when it comes to dealing with employees and employment law. If you're part of that, you'll get updates in what's going on, but find a way to get updates to your executive pastor, whoever deals with that, on what's going on with the law. We just had a major shift in the FLSA salary threshold,
Right.
which affects.
Describe that. So some might not even know.
Sure.
They've got till the end of the year to come into.
So before this shift that we had in July, the salary threshold was 35,558, something like that. And so what that means is if you have exempt employees that are salaried, now exempt employees means not hourly employees.
Right.
So we all know that hourly employees, or should know that hourly employees, we have to pay overtime if they work over 40 hours.
And there's a minimum wage they have to follow.
Absolutely. So if we're talking about your salaried employees. Now there's another caveat, going back to that whole church and state, thing. If they're classified as ministers, they're exempt. So you can get by with paying your ministers nothing. Don't do that though. But we're talking about people, employees that don't fall in either the hourly or they're not classified as a minister.
As a pastor or minister.
So you could think of your administrative staff, your potentially, production, facilities. And so that salary threshold was bumped up significantly in July and will be bumped up even further starting in January. And so that is a perfect situation where if you're unsure, I would consult with somebody and go, because sometimes it may be you can classify more people as ministers and you're just not, or there's should we move them to hourly? Because what will happen if you keep your salaried employees below that threshold, you will be required to pay over 40 hours overtime.
Okay.
So that's just a snippet of things that churches need to be up to date with. And I can't predict the future, but I am guessing there's going to be more stuff like that is going to shift.
Sure.
And churches have been in a bubble for a very long time. And laws haven't changed and regulations haven't changed that much, but we might start seeing more of that. And so I think, it's prudent for churches to really have Church Law and Tax is another great resource. Their membership is fairly minimal. And so that's another way you could get notifications in your inbox of alerting you to be up to speed with things like that. So that's on that side. Also for employees, I think it's really important just to make sure your policies are clearly outlined in your handbook.
That's good.
I don't think it's a bad idea to have an attorney review your handbook because you also want to make sure that you're getting those policies in there that are mandated by the state or the federal government. And so clearly state those in your handbook, and then you have a basis for which to refer to when you have an issue with an employee. I think churches where they, maybe make a mistake, they don't have it clearly outlined.
Or we have the good old boy system.
Right.
You're working for the church. Hey, we love each other. But when personalities, wounds, hurts, I thought you said, you didn't treat me fair. We need things documented. And I would say that's probably one of the things I've seen a lot of leadership make a mistake is not documenting.
I would agree.
Maybe in the documentation of the release of an employee, of being on probation, documenting the previous things. Anything you want to speak to that on?
Keeping those employee files up to date. I would agree with that. I also, abiding by those policies that you have stated, being consistent, with employees. And if there is, an instance where you do kind of veer off and have an exception for somebody, documenting that.
Yeah.
And also because my kind of philosophy is you want to have such a good internal HR system and policies that your employee does not need to go externally to get something handled.
Okay.
Because a lot of times, law might side with the employee. And so you want to make sure you're internally kind of secure with that so that they don't have to go elsewhere to get.
And I want to challenge, I know a lot just by statistics of churches, there are a lot of you that you're not a monster big church and you go, it's me, the pastor, I got an office assistant and I have a couple part-time stipend youth, children's worship, whatever. And you go, we don't need that. I would say size does not determine.
I say
the
now
need.
is the time to get it in place because
Yes.
when you start growing and you start adding employees, as you can probably attest to, it starts getting harder to carve out that time to make sure you're doing
Right.
those things the right way.
And so I would advise that you get there. Last thing I want to ask, because I would say one of the biggest outside church complaints that people talk about church is church and money. All they want is my money. Any best practices, abuse of funds, misuse of funds, accountability, oversight, review, counting rooms. You have probably heard stories after stories. We had a church here in Colorado Springs that the finance person embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars over several years. So what can we do? Any best practices there? What can you offer us in that financial arena? Or where have you seen churches make mistakes?
Right. So just as with, the handbooks and the policies and documentation, I think this is another big place you do not want to skip steps.
Sure.
Or, I'm not the best person to ask about finance, but I will say there are a lot of, programs out there or, organizations that can help you understand what financial controls you need to have in place.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is when your board becomes very, instrumental, and really encourage churches to have what we call, I'm blanking on the word, but basically having a board that's not just made up of people you have self-appointed, but a disinterested board. That's what I was looking for.
Good.
That your board is made up of people that are not related to you, do not work for you,
Not my
are
mother,
not
my
your
brother,
best
my
friend,
nephew.
because those are those kind of checks and balances you can put into place.
Yeah.
To have people there that can ask you questions for the financial controls. I know one big one that I haven't implemented before is to have like a 2-factor authentication, or to have where
Yes.
not a sole person can withdraw from an account, and just to have those types of
Checks and
controls,
balances.
checks and balances.
It's good.
I think you need, as churches, even more so, I think it is incredibly important to be transparent with your
good.
finances.
Okay.
And so getting those audits done, posting those annual reports, the more transparent you are with your congregation, the less questions you're probably going to be asked.
Sure.
And so, because they're going, oh, wow, they're willing to say this. They're willing to say this is what we spend on personnel. So they're willing to say that. And so then I think it's when churches don't talk to, and then you start to see, oh, well, they're building this. And, that's when the questions start to come with the stewarding of the finances.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Ashley, how can people reach out to you, contact you if they just want to find out more about your services? Is there a situation, something that you could want to handle? Tell us just how can they reach you?
Sure. The best way to reach me is just via email, and my email is very long. I apologize. But it's ashley@hawkandlegalconsulting.com. That's the best way to reach me. I offer a free initial consult to any churches if you just don't know if you need an attorney.
Right.
I'm happy to kind of dive into that further. Like I said, there are other amazing resources out there. If you're not ready to speak one-on-one with an attorney, Church Law and Tax has got a great resources there.
And she will be happy to refer you, maybe not to a specific person, but to say you're going to need somebody to represent you in your city, in your state, but for some just general counsel and advice. And so it's Ashley, that's an Ley, hawklegalandconsulting.com, and you can find out more there. So, hey, thank you guys. Check out all of our resources that are free at deanhawk.com, and we will see you next month. Thank you, Ashley.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us today. For a free sermon series and teaching outlines by Pastor Dean, visit us at deanhawk.com. Be sure and join us next month as we continue our growth on leadership.